Have you ever felt like you were awake in the middle of a room full of sleeping people? Have you had that strange sensation that everyone around you is taking very seriously things that seem like a big theatrical performance? If your answer is yes, you might be experiencing something that ancient wise ones knew well: the dangerous gift of seeing beyond the surface. This different way of seeing might seem like a gift at first. You begin to notice tensions that others don't catch, see through social masks, and recognize power games that go unnoticed by most. But here's the first warning. This vision can also become a source of profound isolation. Our society functions like a grand collective agreement. Everyone agrees that money has value, that time is linear, that professional titles define who we are. These are useful fictions, stories we tell to organize life together. But what happens when you start to see these stories as exactly that? Just stories. There's something almost supernatural in some people's ability to see beyond the surface of things. This special sensitivity allows them to pick up tensions in the air that others don't even know exist. It's like having a super-developed emotional radar that detects the illusions and manipulations that move the world. At first, it seems like an incredible gift. You can predict conflicts before they explode. You anticipate social changes before they manifest. You notice when someone is pretending or when a situation isn't what it appears to be. But here lies a silent danger. The more you see, the more you distance yourself from the group. It's as if the clarity of vision created an invisible distance between you and the people around you. The conscious observer gradually becomes a stranger in the midst of the crowd, even when physically present. This distance doesn't happen by choice. It's a natural consequence of seeing what's behind the curtains. When you realize that much of what drives society are agreements about invented realities, something fundamental changes inside you. Money reveals its nature. Paper with numbers that only has value because everyone agrees it does. Time shows its face, a human convention that doesn't exist the same way in nature. Titles and careers unveil their character. Artificial hierarchies based on frequently arbitrary criteria. These perceptions aren't necessarily destructive, but they forever alter how you participate in social systems. It's impossible to return to previous innocence. Once you recognize these collective agreements as shared mental constructions, a subtle but profound transformation happens. It's like you were a person watching a very engaging movie and suddenly notice the cameras, the microphones, the assembled set. The movie continues, but you're no longer hypnotized in the same way. You can still get emotional about the story, but a part of you remains aware that you're watching a production. Similarly, when someone realizes that society sustains itself on shared stories, they stop being completely enchanted by the system. They still participate, but with a different consciousness, like an actor who knows they're performing. This awakening to the constructed nature of many aspects of social life works like breaking an ancient spell. You realize you were hypnotized by conventions that previously seemed absolutely real and necessary. Work continues being important, but you see that many of the hierarchies are elaborate performances. Relationships continue being valuable, but you notice how many are based on social roles instead of authentic connection. This clarity brings freedom, but also brings a heavy responsibility. You can no longer pretend you don't know what you know. Comfortable ignorance becomes impossible. When this shift in perspective happens, it inevitably affects everyone around. Without even trying, the person who sees differently begins to disturb the collective illusion. Not because they're doing something wrong, but simply because their presence reminds others that there's a reality behind the masks everyone wears. It's as if they were a mirror reflecting things people prefer not to see. And this generates profound discomfort, instinctive resistance, sometimes even open hostility. People feel something is different, even when they can't explain exactly what. The reaction of people who are still completely immersed in social conventions can be devastating. They tend to label those who see differently as irresponsible, lazy, or mentally unstable. It's a natural and understandable defense. If the person questioning the structures is right, it means they might be wasting energy on things without real substance. It's psychologically easier to attack the messenger than examine the message. That's why, throughout history, mystics, philosophers, and artists were ridiculed, exiled, persecuted. They represented a threat not to political power, but to the power of illusions that kept society functioning without questions. This pattern repeats in all eras with impressive consistency. Socrates questioned Athens' certainties and was forced to drink poison. Jesus challenged the religious and social structures of his time and was crucified. Galileo showed that Earth wasn't the center of the universe and was persecuted by the church. Van Gogh painted reality in a way nobody could understand and died poor and misunderstood. Their crime wasn't malice or gratuitous rebellion, but clarity of vision. They saw beyond what was socially accepted and paid the highest price for this clarity. People prefer their familiar illusions and react violently when someone tries to remove them. This doesn't happen from conscious malice, but from profound existential fear. When someone questions the foundations of social reality, they automatically question the identity of everyone who built themselves on those foundations. It's like telling someone who spent their whole life building a house on sand that maybe they should look for solid ground. The first reaction is rarely gratitude. More often, it's anger, denial, or attempts to disqualify whoever brought the uncomfortable information. However, this ability to see beyond social constructions doesn't need to be seen as an inevitable curse. In fact, it can become the greatest possible liberation for a human being. When you realize that many of life's dramas are essentially collective performances, they automatically lose the power to emotionally devastate you. You still feel, still participate, still get involved, but with a lightness that didn't exist before. It's as if a heavy burden was removed from your shoulders. Problems don't disappear, but your capacity to deal with them multiplies exponentially. Seeing through social constructions drastically reduces the excessive seriousness with which we treat temporary setbacks. You stop dramatizing small problems as if they were existential tragedies. You stop taking personal offenses as life or death matters. You stop treating temporary changes as permanent catastrophes. There's something eternal and immutable behind all superficial fluctuations. When you touch this eternity, even briefly, a deep peace settles in your heart. It's not the peace of ignorance, but the peace of understanding. This transformation of vision also reveals something revolutionary about the nature of human happiness. Many people believe they need to solve all external problems to be happy. But those who see beyond realize that inner peace doesn't depend on circumstances, but on perspective. You can be in the middle of a storm and still maintain your serenity, because you know storms are temporary, but your essence is permanent. However, there's a real danger in this journey, and it's not where most people imagine. The true risk isn't being rejected by others or misunderstood by society. The real danger lies in how you carry this expanded vision. There's an almost irresistible temptation to feel superior to people who are still immersed in collective illusions. The ego is extremely clever and can disguise itself as spiritual wisdom. It whispers seductive thoughts. You're special because you see what others can't see. You're evolved. You're superior to these common people. When someone falls into this subtle trap, the vision that should bring compassion transforms into destructive arrogance. The clarity that should connect becomes voluntary and bitter isolation. The person starts looking at others with contempt disguised as understanding, as if they were naive children playing with silly toys. This is perhaps the greatest tragedy that can happen to someone who awakens. The supreme art of expanded consciousness lies in learning to participate fully in life without completely identifying with any role you play. This doesn't mean becoming disinterested or emotionally distant. On the contrary, it means getting involved more deeply, but without destructive attachments. The wise person doesn't abandon life's stage. They become a more skillful and conscious actor. You continue working, but your identity doesn't depend on your position or professional recognition. You continue relating, but you know that true love transcends the social roles of husband, wife, son, father. You continue caring for your body, but understand that your essence goes far beyond flesh and bones. This dance between participation and detachment is one of the greatest skills a human being can develop. But this existential mastery has an emotional price that can be difficult to bear. A deep and sometimes oppressive loneliness. You can't explain everything you see to just anyone. Not everyone is ready to hear certain truths about the nature of reality. Some conversations become completely impossible. You learn to keep certain perceptions as secret treasures. To speak only when directly asked. To respect each person's timing without forcing anything. This can be profoundly isolating, but it also teaches a cosmic patience that didn't exist before. A compassion that arises from understanding that each person is exactly where they need to be in the moment. The visionary's loneliness isn't necessarily negative, although it can be painful. It's like being an adult surrounded by children. You can love the children deeply, but certain conversations can only happen with other adults. That's why, throughout history, there's a fascinating phenomenon. People who awaken to broader realities begin to recognize each other through subtle signs. It's as if there were an invisible frequency that only certain people can tune into. When two awakened ones meet, they often don't need many words to establish a deep connection. There's a silent recognition, an understanding that goes beyond verbal communication. A shared knowing about aspects of existence that are difficult to express in common language. These encounters created, over the centuries, revolutionary schools of thought, transformative spiritual movements, circles of visionary artists, communities of truth seekers. People who saw beyond the conventional veil came together to share their discoveries, to support each other mutually in territories of consciousness that are dangerous to navigate alone. These groups offered relief from isolation and safe space for mutual growth, places where it was possible to speak openly about perceptions that would have to be hidden in other contexts. When awakened beings meet, something almost magical happens. They can explore existential questions without fear of being labeled as crazy. They can laugh together at the comic tragedy they observe in the human condition. They can share insights about the nature of reality that would be incomprehensible to most people. These encounters are precious oases in the desert of general incomprehension. But not everyone is lucky enough to find their spiritual tribe. Many carry their expanded vision alone for years, decades, sometimes their entire lifetime. For these consciousness loners, the challenge is even more intense. Keeping the heart open without hardening from bitterness. Continuing to love humanity even when feeling profoundly misunderstood by it. Preserving mental sanity without external support. Resisting the temptation to close themselves in protective cynicism. Maintaining faith in the possibility of authentic connection even when it seems impossible. History reveals a fascinating pattern about the destiny of visionaries that's worth contemplating. Often, those who were rejected, ridiculed, or persecuted in their time became celebrated by following generations. The madman becomes a venerated prophet. The heretic becomes a canonized saint. The misunderstood artist becomes a universally recognized genius. Van Gogh, who couldn't sell a single painting while alive, today has his works worth millions. This phenomenon isn't historical coincidence. There's a deep explanation for this value inversion. Visionaries are generally a few steps ahead of their historical time. They perceive truths that will only be accepted by the masses years or decades later. Society needs time to digest new visions, to adapt to perspectives that initially seem threatening. What seems radical today might be common sense tomorrow. Ideas that shocked one generation become accepted foundations of the next. Those who see first pay the price of being out of time. But they also have the extraordinary privilege of being pioneers in exploring new territories of consciousness. The key to surviving this interval between vision and recognition is cultivating patience, humility, and lightness. But there's an extremely subtle trap in this path, and it's perhaps more dangerous than all social rejection combined. The human ego is incredibly creative and can disguise itself even as spiritual enlightenment. It whispers thoughts that seem spiritual, but are profoundly egoic. You're special because you see what others don't see. You're evolved. You're superior to these blind people. When someone falls into this devastating trap, something terrible happens. The person stops seeing themselves as part of humanity and begins seeing themselves as separate from and superior to it. They transform their expanded vision into a weapon of judgment against others. They become cynical, bitter, disdainful. They use their perception of others' illusions to feel elevated, instead of using it to develop greater compassion. This is the crucial difference between genuine wisdom and ego disguised as wisdom. True spiritual vision doesn't elevate the person above others. It connects them more deeply with universal suffering and struggle. When you truly see, you realize everyone is on the same cosmic journey, just at different points on the path. This generates profound humility, not spiritual arrogance. One of the most beautiful and surprising consequences of developing this expanded vision is that life becomes richer and more intense, not poorer or colorless. Many people imagine that seeing through social illusions would make existence bland, emotionless, meaningless. But the effect is exactly opposite to what would be expected. When you stop wasting energy on artificial dramas and unnecessary conflicts, Much more vital energy remains for authentically meaningful experiences. Those who see through social constructions don't stop living intensely. They live more presently and consciously. They eat with more awareness and genuine pleasure. They love with more depth and less destructive possessiveness. They work with more focus and less chronic anxiety. They relax more completely. Life becomes more vivid and colorful because you're more awake to experience it directly. This quality of more intense presence is naturally contagious. People feel when someone is truly present and connected with themselves, even if they can't intellectually explain what they feel. There's a magnetic quality in those who live consciously. Others are naturally drawn to this energy of authenticity, even without understanding why. But here's a crucial point that many visionaries discover the hard way. You can't force other people to see what you see. Awakening is an intimate process that's born from inside out. Trying to wake someone by force is like trying to open a flower with your hands. You might destroy the flower in the process. Each person has their own timing, their own lessons, their own unique path. This understanding brings a paradoxical and transformative liberation. When you stop trying to change others, you paradoxically become more capable of influencing them positively. Your authentic presence speaks louder than any elaborate argument. Your personal example inspires more than any moralistic sermon. Your inner peace is more contagious than any spiritual propaganda. That's why those who truly awaken learn the art of cosmic patience. They plant seeds of consciousness through lived example, not intellectual discourse. They live in a way that awakens natural curiosity in others, instead of trying to convince them with philosophical arguments. And they accept that some people might never awaken in this lifetime, and that this too is part of cosmic perfection. This profound acceptance of each person's journey can initially generate a sensation of almost unbearable existential isolation. It's as if you were a lonely island lost in the middle of an infinite ocean. But with time and spiritual maturation, an even broader perspective gradually reveals itself. You're not a separate island. You're an integral part of the same ocean. Your individual consciousness is just a temporary wave in eternal universal consciousness. When this perception deepens, loneliness transforms into a different and deeper form of connection. You feel connected not just with people who think like you, but with all life, with all manifested and unmanifested existence. Even when physically alone, you're consciously participating in something infinitely greater than any social group could offer. Spiritual truth behaves exactly like cosmic music. At first, maybe only one person hears the subtle melody, but gradually, others begin to tune into the same elevated frequency. The music spreads naturally, not because someone forces it through propaganda, but because it's intrinsically beautiful and resonates with something deep in the human soul. Similarly, the truths you perceive today might echo in many people's consciousness tomorrow, creating waves of transformation you can't even imagine. Mystics from all spiritual traditions, despite their cultural differences, have one universal characteristic in common. They laugh. It's not laughter of contempt or intellectual superiority, but of deep reverence and joy. They see the cosmic comedy, the divine drama, the sacred dance of existence in all its contradictory aspects. Alan Watts had a special ability to show this playful dimension of spirituality, revealing that excessive seriousness might be the greatest obstacle to awakening. This laughter is born from recognizing that everything is simultaneously completely serious and completely absurd. This capacity to laugh at life doesn't diminish its sacredness. On the contrary, it recognizes it more completely and maturely. It's like watching a movie that's simultaneously intense drama and brilliant comedy. You can cry and laugh simultaneously, feel profound compassion and absolute lightness in the same moment. People who develop this expanded vision naturally begin to function as clear mirrors for others. They don't judge morally, don't criticize destructively, don't preach dogmas. They simply reflect back, through their neutral presence, what people show of themselves. But mirrors can be extremely uncomfortable for those who prefer not to see their own real reflection. Many people have built elaborate identities based on masks and personas carefully crafted over years. When they encounter someone who functions as a clear mirror, these masks become visible. And this can generate much psychological discomfort. It's emotionally easier to avoid the mirror or attack it than to question the authenticity of the mask. That's why sages from all eras developed subtle and non-threatening ways of transmitting wisdom without directly confronting people's psychological defenses. Jesus spoke in parables that allowed multiple interpretations, each person understanding at their level. Buddha told stories that functioned simultaneously as entertainment and profound teaching. The Sufis used jokes and tales that made people laugh and think at the same time, dissolving resistances through humor. These masters intuitively understood that direct truth can be psychologically difficult to swallow, so they wrapped it in more palatable and less threatening forms. Not because they were hiding important information, but because they knew each person needs to discover truth at their own pace and in their own unique way. This sensitivity for transmitting transformative truths without destroying illusions prematurely is a refined art that requires much compassion and cosmic patience. You need to love people enough to respect their psychological defenses, even when you clearly see what's behind them. You need to trust that each person has their own sacred journey and their own divine timing for awakening, without trying to artificially accelerate this natural process. Even with all these precautions and all this refined sensitivity, there's an inevitable reality you eventually need to accept with serenity. Once you see certain truths about the nature of reality, you can't unsee them. It's like discovering there's a secret door in your house that leads to extraordinary gardens. Even if you sometimes choose not to use the door, you'll always know it's there, forever changing your relationship with the house. This expanded consciousness is irreversible, and this can be psychologically frightening at first. There's a nostalgic part of you that sometimes wishes you could return to comfortable ignorance, to be able to engage in social dramas with the same unconscious intensity as before. But this is no longer possible. You've crossed an invisible line, and there's no return to the paradise of unconsciousness. The true teaching that emerges from this transformative experience isn't something you speak or write, but something you embody and live moment by moment. Your presence becomes your most powerful and eloquent message. When you genuinely inhabit this space of integrated clarity and compassion, people feel it immediately. Even if they can't intellectually explain what they feel, there's an unmistakable quality in the presence of someone who lives consciously. There's a special, almost tangible quality in the energy of someone who has transcended the need to prove something or convince someone. People feel naturally calmer around this person, more authentic, more connected with themselves. It's as if the conscious presence gave silent permission for others to also relax their masks and be more genuine. Gradually, the compulsive need to explain or convince naturally diminishes. Instead of trying to use words to transmit spiritual insights, you simply live from this broader understanding. You're more present in each moment, more connected with each person, more awake to each experience, however simple it might seem. This transformation from intellectual vision to embodied presence is perhaps the ripest fruit of the entire spiritual awakening process. You stop being someone who had occasional insights and become someone who incorporates these insights into the texture of daily life. This is contagious in a very subtle and powerful way, but it's absolutely crucial to maintain constant vigilance against the most subtle trap of all, spiritual ego. Even when you think you've left arrogance behind, it can return disguised as humility. The ego is extremely creative and can whisper things like, "You're so humble. You're so special for not thinking you're special. You're so evolved for recognizing you're not evolved." The most effective antidote for this is consciously cultivating the ability to laugh at yourself with affection. The true sage never takes themselves completely seriously. They know that, however much they've grown spiritually, there's always infinitely more to discover. They maintain an attitude of eternal beginner, always curious, always open to learning something completely new. The heritage that visionaries leave to the world is fascinating to observe through the lens of historical perspective. Human societies have a natural tendency to resist the new, to persecute pioneers, to defend the status quo tooth and nail. But they rarely manage to completely destroy the revolutionary ideas of authentic visionaries. Truth has a life of its own, an organic persistence that transcends suppression efforts. It spreads through underground channels, survives camouflaged in works of art, resurfaces in other eras when people are more prepared. Ideas that were violently rejected in one era frequently become accepted and venerated foundations of the following era. That's why awakening requires not only the courage to see beyond the veil of appearances, but also the gentleness necessary to carry these perceptions without unnecessarily hurting yourself or others. Humor is a powerful ally in this journey. Compassion is absolutely essential, and a long historical perspective helps cultivate the cosmic patience necessary for the work. You don't need to carry the impossible weight of changing the entire world alone. Your function might be simply to keep a small flame of consciousness lit so others can find it when they're ready and looking. One of the qualities that most clearly differentiates someone who truly sees from those who only think they see is the genuine and spontaneous ability to laugh at themselves. The ego disguised as wisdom takes itself extremely seriously, proclaims its enlightenment, expects recognition and admiration from others. In marked contrast, the authentic sage plays with their own perceptions, questions their own certainties, remains open to discovering they were completely wrong about things they were absolutely certain of. They understand viscerally that awakening isn't arriving at a glorious final destination, but embarking on an endless journey of continuous discovery and growth. Returning to the question that opened this entire reflection, have you ever felt awake among dreamers? If the answer is yes, know that you're not broken, cursed, or condemned to eternal isolation. You've simply developed a sensitivity that's still relatively rare, but that's becoming increasingly common in our era of transition. We live in a historical moment of collective awakening, where more and more people are questioning traditional narratives, seeking authenticity, valuing presence over social performance. Your mission, if you choose to accept it, isn't to force anyone to awaken or prove that you're right about the nature of social conventions. It's simply to carry your vision with lightness, live with growing integrity, love without conditions, and trust that your authentic presence will be enough to plant seeds in hearts ready to receive them. What you see beyond the surface isn't a heavy burden to carry in solitude, but a precious gift to share gently with whoever is ready to receive it. Don't separate yourself from life because of your expanded vision. Let it enrich every moment, every relationship, every experience you have. If this content resonated deeply with you, if you recognized yourself in these words and perceptions, leave your like so more people can find this reflection, and consider subscribing to the channel, because we're going to continue exploring together these fascinating territories of human consciousness.